A woman stands alone at a railway platform in West Texas, her wedding dress gray with dust. The man who sent for her never came. No money, no family, no way home. When a stranger offers her a choice between charity and partnership, she takes the harder road, because survival isn't about being saved. It's about refusing to disappear. If you want to see how two people rebuild everything from nothing, stay with me until the end. And drop a like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The platform at Ashford Station baked under a sun that had no mercy. It was the kind of heat that made the air shimmer, that turned breathing into labor, that reduced the world to a single brutal fact. This land wanted you gone. Eliza Ward sat on a wooden bench that had been worn smooth by years of waiting bodies. Her dress, once ivory, bought with borrowed money in St. Louis, was the color of disappointment now. Dust clung to the lace at her wrists. Her carpetbag sat beside her, everything she owned compressed into a space smaller than a coffin. She'd been waiting for 3 days. The station master had stopped looking at her on the second day. Pity was expensive in a place like this, and he'd already spent what little he had. The morning train had come and gone. The afternoon train wouldn't arrive for another 2 days. She had $4 left and nowhere to spend them that mattered. The platform was empty except for her and the heat. Even the birds had the sense to find shade. Then she heard boots on gravel. Eliza didn't look up at first. Men had passed before, some curious, some leering, all moving on when they realized she had nothing worth taking. But these footsteps slowed, then stopped. "You've been here a while." It wasn't a question. Eliza lifted her eyes. The man stood about 10 feet away, hat pulled low against the sun. He was tall and lean in the way of someone who'd forgotten what a full meal looked like. Maybe 40, maybe older. Hard to tell when a face had been carved down to essentials by wind and work. His shirt was faded blue, patched at the elbows. Dust covered his boots like a second skin. 3 days, Eliza said. He nodded slowly, like he'd suspected as much. Waiting on someone? I was. The past tense hung between them. He glanced at her dress, at the carpetbag, at the way her hands were folded too carefully in her lap. Mail order bride? Eliza's jaw tightened. That's not your concern. No, he agreed. But you're still sitting here, so I'm guessing he didn't show. She could have lied. Could have said he was delayed, that there'd been a misunderstanding, that everything was fine. But lies required energy, and she was so tired of spending what little she had left on dignity. He changed his mind, she said flatly. Sent a telegram to the station 2 days ago. Said he'd made other arrangements. Other arrangements? As if she were a shipment of lumber that could be canceled without consequence. The man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You got people back east? No? Money for a ticket? Not enough." He exhaled through his nose, not quite a sigh, more like the sound of someone calculating odds he already knew were bad. He looked out across the empty stretch of land beyond the platform, where the scrub grass grew in defeated clumps and the horizon dissolved into haze. "Name's Caleb Hayes," he said finally. "Got a ranch about 8 miles north of here. It's not much. Been a hard year. But I could use help with the house, cooking, mending, that sort of thing. I can pay a little, not a lot, but enough to get you back east eventually if that's what you want." Eliza studied him. His face was unreadable, worn smooth like the bench she sat on. This wasn't kindness, or if it was the careful kind, offered with one hand while the other stayed near the pocket. "Why?" she asked. "Why what?" "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" Caleb looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not warmth exactly, more like recognition. "Because I know what it's like to be stuck," he said quietly. "And because leaving someone on this platform in August is the same as killing them, just slower." It was the bluntest act of decency Eliza had ever witnessed. No poetry, no pretense, just arithmetic. She stood, picking up her carpetbag. "I don't need charity." "Good," Caleb said. "Because I'm not offering it. I need help, and you need a roof. That's a trade, not a favor." Eliza looked at the empty platform behind her, at the shimmering heat, at the next 2 days of waiting for a train that would take her to a city where she knew no one and had nothing. "All right," she said. Caleb nodded once, then turned and started walking toward a wagon hitched near the edge of the station. Eliza followed, her bag growing heavier with each step. The dress that was supposed to mean something now just dead weight. The wagon was as worn as everything else. Slats sun-bleached, one wheel wrapped in mismatched rope. A single horse stood in the traces, head low, too hot to care about much. Caleb took her bag and set it in the back without ceremony. Then he climbed up onto the seat and waited. Eliza hesitated. This was the moment where trust became decision, where desperation turned into direction. She thought about the man who'd left her here, about the months she'd spent writing letters to someone she'd never met, about the way hope could betray you more thoroughly than cruelty ever could. Then she climbed up beside Caleb, and he clicked his tongue at the horse. They rode in silence for the first mile. The land around them was flat and merciless. Pale dirt, scattered mesquite, the kind of emptiness that made you understand why people went mad out here. The sun pressed down like a hand. "How long you been ranching?" Eliza asked finally, more to fill the silence than because she cared. 15 years, Caleb said. Bought the land with my wife in 72. Built the house ourselves. Eliza caught the past tense. She's gone? 2 years now. His voice was flat, factual. Fever. Took her in 4 days. I'm sorry. Everyone is. There was no bitterness in it, just exhaustion. Doesn't change anything. Eliza understood that. Condolences were just another kind of currency people spent when they didn't know what else to do. You got anyone? Caleb asked. My mother died when I was 12, Eliza said, raised by an aunt who made it clear I was a burden. She passed 3 years ago. I worked as a seamstress in St. Louis until the factory closed. After that, she shrugged. The marriage advertisement seemed like the only door left. And now you're here. And now I'm here. They fell quiet again. The wagon rattled over uneven ground, the horse plodding forward with the resignation of something that had stopped expecting better. After another mile, Caleb said, House is rough. I haven't kept it up the way I should. Probably mice. Definitely dust. I can handle dust. Meals are whatever I can pull together. Usually beans, sometimes meat if I get lucky. Haven't had bread in months. I can bake? Caleb glanced at her sideways, something almost like surprise crossing his face. You know how? I know how to do a lot of things, Eliza said evenly. Just because I ended up on that platform doesn't mean I'm useless. For the first time, something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Caleb's mouth. It was gone before it fully formed, but it had been there. Didn't think you were useless, he said. Just didn't expect someone in a wedding dress to know her way around a kitchen. The dress is a mistake, Eliza said. The skills aren't. Caleb nodded, and the conversation ended there. The ranch appeared on the horizon about 20 minutes later, a low collection of buildings that seemed to crouch against the land rather than rise from it. The house was small, single-story, wood grayed by weather. A barn stood off to one side, sagging in the middle. Fences ran in uneven lines toward a dry creek bed that looked like it hadn't seen water in years. Caleb pulled the wagon up in front of the house and climbed down. He grabbed Eliza's bag and set it on the porch without looking at her. I'll show you the kitchen, he said. Eliza followed him inside, and the smell hit her first. Stale air, old smoke, something sour she couldn't name. The front room was dim, curtains drawn against the heat. A table sat in the center, scarred and uneven. 2 chairs. No decoration. No sign that anyone had cared about this space in a long time. The kitchen was worse. Dishes piled in a basin, grease filmed across the stove, flour spilled and hardened on the counter. A pot sat on the floor, crusted with something that might have been stew once. Eliza set her bag down and looked around slowly. This wasn't neglect born of laziness. This was what grief looked like when it turned into architecture. I know it's bad, Caleb said from the doorway. His voice was tight, defensive. Eliza turned to face him. It's not bad, she said carefully. It's just been a while. 2 years, Caleb said. Then it's been waiting for someone to care again. She looked back at the kitchen. I can work with this. Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Your room's through there. Used to be storage. I cleared it out last night. Bed's clean. Eliza nodded. I'll be in the barn, Caleb said. You need anything? I'll hear you. Then he left, the door closing quietly behind him, and Eliza was alone. She stood in the dim kitchen and felt the weight of the day settle onto her shoulders. The waiting, the heat, the decision that had brought her here. She thought about the man who'd promised to marry her, who'd written letters full of careful hope, who'd vanished the moment his courage faltered. Then she rolled up her sleeves and started washing dishes. By the time the sun began its slow descent, Eliza had made a dent. The dishes were clean, the stove scrubbed, the floor swept. She'd found flour and lard and salt in the pantry, enough to make biscuits if she was careful. The smell of baking bread began to fill the house, pushing back against the stale air. Caleb came in near dusk. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, staring at the clean counter, the pot of beans simmering on the stove, the plate of biscuits cooling on the table. "You didn't have to do all this," he said quietly. "You said you needed help with the house," Eliza replied. "This is help." Caleb nodded slowly. He moved to the table and sat down, hands resting flat on the wood. Eliza brought the beans over, ladled them into 2 bowls, set the biscuits between them. They ate in silence. The food was simple, nothing special, but it was warm, and it was there. Caleb ate like a man who'd forgotten what that felt like. When they finished, he pushed his bowl away and said, "Thank you." Eliza met his eyes. "You gave me a roof. I gave you a meal. We're even." "Still," Caleb said. "Thank you." Eliza nodded, and something unspoken passed between them. An agreement, maybe, or just an acknowledgement that they were both trying to survive the same brutal world in their own broken ways. That night, Eliza lay in the small room Caleb had cleared for her. The bed was narrow, the mattress thin, but it was hers. Through the thin walls, she could hear Caleb moving in the other room. Slow, deliberate steps, the creak of a chair, the sound of a man trying to fill space he'd been avoiding for too long. She thought about the train she hadn't taken, about the life she'd imagined in letters that meant nothing now. She thought about how close she'd come to disappearing entirely, swallowed by heat and indifference. And she thought about the man who'd pulled her back from that edge, not with grand gestures or false promises, but with the blunt truth that she had something to offer and he needed it. It wasn't love, it wasn't even friendship, but it was solid ground, and that was more than she'd had in a long time. The next morning, Eliza woke before dawn. Habit, maybe, or the fact that the bed was unfamiliar. She dressed quietly and stepped into the kitchen. Caleb was already gone. She could see him through the window out near the barn, moving between the shadows. She put coffee on to boil and started assessing what supplies were left. The pantry was sparse, flour running low, a few cans of beans, a sack of cornmeal that had seen better days. No sugar, no butter. Enough to survive. Not enough to live. By the time Caleb came back in, the sun was cresting the horizon and the coffee was ready. He poured himself a cup without speaking, drank it standing by the window. "I need to go into town today," he said finally. "Pick up feed. Maybe some other supplies if there's money left." "I could make a list," Eliza offered. "Things for the kitchen." Caleb glanced at her. "You know what this place can afford." "I know what poverty looks like," Eliza said evenly. "I'll keep it reasonable." Caleb studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, write it down." Eliza found a scrap of paper and a pencil. She kept the list short. Salt, lard, a little sugar if possible. Necessities, not wishes. Caleb took the list, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his pocket. "I'll be back by afternoon," he said. Then he hesitated, one hand on the doorframe. "You'll be all right here?" "I've been all right in worse places," Eliza said. Caleb nodded again, and then he was gone. Eliza spent the morning working. She mended a tear in one of the curtains, scrubbed the floors, pulled weeds from the small patch of dirt outside the kitchen door, where something might grow if the rain ever came. She moved through the tasks with the efficiency of someone who'd learned long ago that survival was built in small increments. Around midday, she heard a sound from the barn. Something crashing, then silence. She set down the rag she'd been using and walked outside. The barn was dim, dust motes spinning in the light that leaked through gaps in the wood. Caleb's horse stood in one of the stalls, unbothered. Near the back, a stack of crates had toppled, spilling old tools across the floor. Eliza righted the crates, stacking them more carefully this time. As she worked, she noticed something else. A workbench shoved against the far wall, covered in a tarp. She lifted one corner and saw tools underneath, a saw, a hammer, chisels, all coated in dust but still good. Someone had built things here once. Someone had cared enough to keep the tools organized, ready. She lowered the tarp and left the barn. Caleb returned in the late afternoon, the wagon bed loaded with sacks of feed and a small crate of supplies. He unloaded in silence, and Eliza helped without being asked. When they brought the last sack into the house, Caleb set the crate on the kitchen table. "Got what you asked for," he said, "and a little extra." Eliza opened the crate. Salt, lard, sugar, and a small bag of dried apples. She looked up at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Caleb said. "But you made bread yesterday. Thought maybe you could make something else." Eliza felt something strange tighten in her chest. Not quite gratitude, not quite surprise. Just the odd weight of being seen. "I'll make pie," she said quietly. "Good," Caleb said. Then he turned and walked back outside, leaving Eliza alone with the supplies and the realization that kindness, even the small kind, could still catch her off guard. The days began to blur into a rhythm. Eliza woke early, made coffee, cooked whatever meals the pantry allowed. Caleb worked the land, feeding the cattle, mending fences, hauling water from the creek bed that had only a trickle left. They spoke little, but the silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood that words were expensive and action was currency. One evening, about a week after Eliza had arrived, she was cleaning up after supper when Caleb spoke from the doorway. "I've been thinking," he said. Eliza turned, drying her hands on a rag. "About what?" "The drought," Caleb said. "It's not breaking. Creek's almost dry. If we don't get rain soon, I'm going to lose the cattle. Maybe the ranch." Eliza nodded. She'd seen the way the land looked, brittle, gasping. "What are your options?" "Not many," Caleb admitted. "I could sell off some of the herd now, take a loss, or I could gamble that the rain comes before they all die." "That's not much of a gamble." "No," Caleb agreed. "It's not." He stepped into the room, arms crossed, the lines around his eyes deeper in the lamplight. "There's another option," he said slowly. "Something I've been turning over for a while now. It's risky, probably stupid." "What is it?" "There's a low spot about a mile north of here," Caleb said. "Natural basin. If I could build a dam across the narrow end, I could trap water when the rains do come. Store it. Use it through the dry season." Eliza considered this. "You'd need to build something strong enough to hold back water." "I would." "You'd need time, and materials, and someone to help you." Caleb met her eyes. "I know." Eliza set the rag down on the counter. "You're asking me." "I'm telling you what I'm thinking," Caleb said carefully. "If you've got an opinion, I'd hear it." Eliza thought about the ranch, about the cattle she'd seen standing listless in the heat, about the way Caleb moved through this place like a man trying to hold together something that wanted to fall apart. "I think it's better than waiting to die," she said finally. Caleb's shoulders relaxed just slightly. "Then we start tomorrow." "We?" "You said you wanted to help." Caleb's tone was even. "This is help." Eliza looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." The work started before dawn. Caleb hitched the horse to the wagon, loaded it with tools, and drove them north across the scrubland. Eliza sat beside him, wearing one of his old shirts over her dress, a hat pulled low against the sun. The basin was exactly as he'd described. A shallow depression in the land, maybe 50 feet across, ringed by low hills. A trickle of water still ran through the center, pooling in a few places before disappearing into the cracked earth. "It doesn't look like much now," Caleb said. "But when the rain comes, this whole area fills. If we can block that end." He pointed to the narrow gap where the water flowed out. "We can trap it." Eliza climbed down from the wagon and walked the perimeter, studying the slope, the soil, the way the water moved. It was ambitious, maybe impossible. "How high does the water get?" she asked. 4 feet in a good year," Caleb said. "Maybe 5. Then you need something at least 6 feet tall, maybe 7, to be safe." Caleb nodded. "I was thinking stone and timber. Reinforce it with clay." Eliza looked at the gap again. "You ever built a dam before?" "No?" "Then we're both learning." Caleb almost smiled. "Guess so." They spent the first day clearing the site, pulling up scrub, moving rocks, leveling the ground where the dam would sit. The work was brutal. The sun climbed and pressed down, turning the air thick. Eliza's hands blistered within the first hour, but she didn't stop. Caleb worked beside her, methodical and silent, digging with the kind of focus that came from necessity. By midday, they'd cleared a section wide enough to start laying stone. Caleb fetched water from the wagon, and they drank in the shade of a scraggly mesquite, too tired to talk. "You don't have to do this," Caleb said after a while. Eliza looked at him, sweat streaking her face, her arms aching. "You already said that." "I mean it." "So do I." Eliza took another drink, then stood. "Let's keep going." They worked until dusk, hauling stone, packing clay, shaping the foundation. By the time they loaded the wagon and started back, Eliza's whole body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. That night, she barely made it through supper before collapsing into bed. But the next morning, she got up and did it again. The dam rose slowly, stone by stone, day by day. Caleb taught Eliza how to fit the rocks together, how to pack the gaps with clay, how to test the structure for weak points. She learned fast, her hands growing tougher, her movements more sure. They didn't talk much while they worked. But in the evenings, back at the house, the silence began to crack. One night, as they sat on the porch after supper, Caleb said, "You ever think about going back east?" Eliza looked out at the darkening land. "Sometimes. Not as much as I used to." "Why not?" "Because I don't have anything there," she said simply. "At least here, I have work. I have a roof. That's more than I had in St. Louis." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're good at this. The work, I mean. Most people wouldn't last a week." "Most people have better options." "Maybe," Caleb said. "Or maybe you're tougher than most people." Eliza glanced at him, but his face was unreadable in the dim light. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "I know you've been hauling rocks in 100-degree heat for 2 weeks without complaining," Caleb said. "That tells me enough." Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. After a while, Caleb spoke again. "My wife used to sit out here," he said quietly. "Every evening, said it was the only time the day felt like it belonged to her." Eliza heard the weight in his voice, the way the words came slow and careful. "You miss her." "Every day," Caleb said. "But it's different now. At first it felt like drowning. Now it just feels like—" He trailed off, searching. "Like carrying something heavy. You get used to the weight, but it doesn't get lighter." Eliza understood that. "My mother used to say grief was just love with nowhere to go." Caleb looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. "She sounds smart." She was. They sat in silence after that, the night settling around them, and for the first time since Eliza had arrived, the house didn't feel quite so empty. 3 weeks into the project, the dam was waist-high and solid. Caleb stood back one afternoon, hands on his hips, studying their work. "It's going to hold," he said. Eliza wiped sweat from her forehead. "You sound surprised." "I am," Caleb admitted. "I didn't think we'd get this far." "Then why start?" Caleb looked at her. "Because doing nothing felt worse." Eliza nodded. She understood that too. They were packing up the tools when Eliza heard hoofbeats. She turned and saw 3 riders approaching from the south, moving fast. Caleb's posture changed immediately, shoulders tight, jaw set. "Get behind the wagon," he said quietly. "Why?" "Just do it." Eliza moved behind the wagon, watching as the riders pulled up. They were well-dressed, too clean for ranch work. The man in the center was older, maybe 50, with a thick gray beard and eyes that measured everything. "Hayes," the man said, his voice smooth and cold. "Victor," Caleb replied flatly. "Victor Hale." Eliza had heard the name in town. A land baron who owned half the county and wanted the other half. "Building something?" Victor asked, nodding toward the dam. "That's right." "Mind telling me what?" "A dam," Caleb said, "to store water." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's ambitious. Expensive, too, I'd imagine." "I'm managing." "I'm sure you are." Victor leaned forward in his saddle. "Thing is, Caleb, that water you're planning to trap, it flows through my land downstream. You dam it up here. You're stealing from me." The water's not yours, Caleb said evenly. Everything downstream is mine, Victor said. And if you think I'm going to let you choke off my supply, you're more foolish than I thought. Caleb's hands curled into fists. I'm not stealing anything. I'm surviving. Then survive somewhere else. Victor straightened. You've got 1 week to tear that down? If you don't, I will. He turned his horse and rode off, the other 2 men following. Eliza stepped out from behind the wagon. Who was that? Trouble, Caleb said quietly. He stared at the dam for a long time, and Eliza saw something flicker across his face. Doubt, maybe, or just exhaustion. We're not stopping, she said. Caleb looked at her. You heard him. I heard him, Eliza said. And I'm telling you, we're not stopping. Caleb studied her, then nodded slowly. All right. They climbed back onto the wagon and rode home in silence, the dam standing behind them like a promise neither of them was sure they could keep. Victor Hale's threat hung over the ranch like smoke that wouldn't clear. Caleb didn't speak much on the ride back. His jaw working in that way Eliza had come to recognize meant he was chewing on something he couldn't spit out. When they reached the house, he unhitched the horse without a word and disappeared into the barn. Eliza stood in the yard, dust settling around her boots, and felt the weight of what had just happened. A week. They had a week before Victor made good on his promise, and the dam was barely half finished. She went inside and started supper, her hands moving through the familiar motions while her mind worked the problem. The beans went into the pot. The cornbread batter came together. But underneath it all was the question neither of them had said aloud yet. What were they actually fighting for? Caleb came in after dark. He sat at the table and ate without tasting, his eyes fixed on something only he could see. We could tear it down, Eliza said finally. Caleb's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. What? The dam. We could tear it down. Give Victor what he wants. And then what? Caleb set the fork down carefully. Wait for the drought to kill everything? Sell off the herd at a loss and walk away? You'd still have the land. Land's worthless without water. Caleb pushed his plate away. Victor knows that. He's been buying up every struggling ranch in the county for the past 5 years, waiting for people to break so he can swoop in and take what's left for pennies. And you think building this dam will stop him? I think it's the only chance I have. Caleb's voice was flat, tired. He controls the town, the bank, half the water rights in the territory. If I don't find a way to survive without depending on what he allows me to have, I'm finished. Eliza studied him across the table. This isn't just about water, is it? Caleb met her eyes, and for a moment she saw past the exhaustion to something harder underneath. No, he said quietly. It's not. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. My wife and I built this place from nothing. Every fence post, every board in this house, we put it here. When she died, I thought about leaving, selling it all and just disappearing. He paused. But that felt like erasing her, like admitting that everything we did together didn't matter. So you stayed. I stayed, Caleb said. And I let the place fall apart because I didn't know how to care about it without her. But building that dam... He stopped, his voice catching. It's the first thing I've done in 2 years that feels like moving forward instead of just waiting to die. Eliza absorbed this, the rawness of it. Then we don't tear it down. Caleb turned. Victor's not bluffing. He'll come with men, with tools. He'll destroy it. Let him try, Eliza said. But we finish it first. In a week? In a week. Caleb stared at her like he was trying to understand how she could possibly mean that. Then something shifted in his expression. Not quite hope, but maybe the shadow of it. You're serious, he said. I didn't come this far to quit because some bully with a land deed thinks he owns the rain, Eliza said. Did you? A slow smile pulled at the corner of Caleb's mouth, the first real one she'd seen from him. No, he said. I didn't. Then we work faster. The next morning they were at the dam before sunrise. Caleb had a plan. Finish the foundation, build up the sides another 3 feet, reinforce the whole structure with timber bracing. It was brutal, impossible work, made worse by the clock ticking in both their heads. They moved like machines. Caleb hauled stone from a dry creek bed 2 miles north while Eliza mixed clay and fitted the rocks into place. Her shoulders screamed. Her hands bled through the calluses she'd built up, but she didn't stop. By midday, the sun was a physical presence, pressing down on them like something with weight and intention. Eliza's vision started to blur at the edges, black spots swimming in the heat shimmer. "Drink," Caleb said, shoving a canteen at her. Eliza drank, the water warm and metallic, and went back to work. "You need to rest," Caleb said. "So do you." "I'm used to this." "Then I'm getting used to it." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but he just shook his head and went back to hauling stone. They worked until the light failed, then loaded the wagon by moonlight and drove home in silence. Eliza's whole body felt like it had been beaten, every muscle a separate complaint. She barely made it through washing the dishes before collapsing into bed. But the next morning, she got up and did it again. 3 days passed like that. Work, sleep, work. The dam climbed higher. The structure started to look like something that might actually hold water. But it wasn't enough. They were still 2 feet short of where they needed to be, and they'd burned through half their deadline. On the 4th morning, Eliza was mixing clay when she heard a wagon approaching. She looked up and saw a man she didn't recognize pulling up near their work site. Older, maybe 60, with the kind of weathered face that came from a lifetime outdoors. Caleb walked over, wiping his hands on his pants. "Ben." "Caleb." The man climbed down slowly, favoring his left leg. "Heard you were building something out here?" "Word travels fast." "It does when Victor Hale's telling everyone in town you're stealing water that doesn't belong to you." Ben looked past Caleb at the dam. "That true?" "No," Caleb said flatly. Ben studied the structure for a long moment. Then he said, "I believe you. Victor's been saying a lot of things lately that don't add up." He turned back to Caleb. "I got some timber you could use. Left over from a barn I tore down last year. You're welcome to it if you can haul it." Caleb blinked. "You're offering to help?" "I'm offering timber," Ben said. "What you do with it is your business." He glanced at Eliza, tipped his hat. "Ma'am." Then he climbed back onto his wagon and rode off. Caleb stood there for a moment, staring after him. Then he turned to Eliza. "Did that just happen?" "I think so," Eliza said. They hauled the timber that afternoon, enough to reinforce the dam's face and build the bracing they needed. It saved them a day, maybe 2. But more than that, it was the first crack in the wall Victor had built around them. That night, as they ate supper, Caleb said, "Ben's taking a risk. If Victor finds out he helped us..." "Then he finds out," Eliza said. "Maybe Ben's tired of being afraid." Caleb looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You really think we can beat Victor?" "I think we can finish the dam," Eliza said. "After that, we'll see." The work continued. They fell into a rhythm born of necessity and exhaustion. Caleb hauling, Eliza building, both of them pushing past the point where their bodies wanted to quit. The dam rose another foot, then another. On the 6th day, with the deadline looming, they were laying the final stones when Eliza heard riders again. Multiple horses this time, coming fast. Caleb heard it too. He straightened, his hand moving instinctively to the hammer at his belt. Victor Hale appeared over the rise with 6 men behind him. They pulled up short of the dam and Victor dismounted slowly, making a show of inspecting their work. "Well," he said, walking the length of the structure, "you've been busy." "We're not finished yet," Caleb said. "No," Victor agreed. "You're not." He turned to face them, his expression pleasant in a way that made Eliza's skin crawl. "I gave you a week to tear this down, Hayes. It's been 6 days, and you've built it higher." "The water's not yours," Caleb said again. "We've had this conversation." Victor's tone hardened. "You're not stupid enough to think you can win this fight." "I'm stupid enough to try." Victor studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled. Cold, thin, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with humor. "You know what I admire about you, Caleb? Your determination. It's impressive, really. Tragic, but impressive." He gestured to the dam. "This thing you've built, it's worthless. Because even if you finish it, even if it holds water, I control the town. The bank, the suppliers. I can make it so no one will sell you feed, no one will buy your cattle, no one will so much as nod at you on the street. Then I'll survive without them," Caleb said. "Will you?" Victor stepped closer. "You're already hanging by a thread. How long do you think you'll last when the whole county turns against you?" "As long as it takes." Victor's smile faded. "You're a fool," he said quietly, "and you're dragging this woman down with you." He glanced at Eliza. "You should leave while you still can, miss. This ranch is dying and Hayes is too stubborn to admit it." Eliza met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not going anywhere." "Your choice," Victor said. He turned back to his horse, then stopped. "One more thing, Hayes. I've been talking to some people in town. Seems there's some concern about the legality of this dam. Water rights are a complicated business. I'd hate to see the sheriff have to get involved." "The sheriff works for you," Caleb said. "He works for the law," Victor replied smoothly. "And the law says you can't obstruct a waterway without proper permits. Do you have permits, Caleb?" Caleb said nothing. "I didn't think so." Victor mounted his horse. "You've got until tomorrow at sundown. After that, I'm filing a complaint, and the sheriff will tear down this dam himself. Save us all a lot of trouble if you just do it now." He rode off, his men following, and the silence they left behind felt heavier than the heat. Eliza watched them disappear over the ridge. "Can he do that? Use the sheriff?" "He can do whatever he wants," Caleb said bitterly. "He owns enough people that the law bends whichever way suits him." "Then we finish it tonight." Caleb turned to her. "Eliza, we finish it tonight," she repeated, "before he can stop us. Even if we do, it won't matter. He'll find another way to tear it down." "Maybe," Eliza said, "but at least we'll have tried." Caleb looked at her for a long time, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of fighting a battle he'd been losing for 2 years. But underneath that there was something else, something that hadn't been there when she first met him on that train platform. "All right," he said quietly, "let's finish it." They worked through the night. Caleb rigged lamps on the wagon, casting harsh shadows across the dam. They laid stone by lamplight, packed clay with hands that had stopped feeling pain hours ago, braced the structure with the last of Ben's timber. Eliza lost track of time. There was only the work: lift, place, pack, repeat. Her muscles moved on instinct. Her mind went somewhere else, somewhere beyond exhaustion, where thought became action without the need for decision. Caleb worked beside her, relentless, his face gaunt in the lamplight. Once, he stumbled, catching himself on the wagon. Eliza grabbed his arm. "You need to rest," she said. "So do you." "I'm serious, Caleb. You're going to collapse." He pulled his arm free gently. "We're almost done." "And if you kill yourself finishing it, what's the point?" Caleb met her eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that had nothing to do with words. "The point is, it gets finished," he said quietly. "Whatever happens after, at least we did this." Eliza wanted to argue, but she understood. This wasn't about the dam anymore. It was about refusing to be erased. They went back to work. Dawn came slowly, the sky lightening in shades of gray and gold. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, the dam was finished, 7 feet tall, solid, reinforced with timber and packed clay. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't perfect, but it was done. Caleb stood back, swaying slightly, and looked at what they'd built. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face gray with exhaustion and dust. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Eliza nodded, too tired to speak. They loaded the tools onto the wagon and climbed up. The ride back was quiet, both of them too drained to talk. When they reached the house, Caleb unhitched the horse, and Eliza stumbled inside, peeling off her dust-caked clothes and collapsing onto the bed still wearing her undergarments. She slept through the day and into the evening, a black, dreamless sleep that felt like falling. When she woke, the house was dark. She sat up slowly, her body one massive ache. Through the window, she could see lamplight in the kitchen. She dressed and walked out to find Caleb sitting at the table, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He looked up when she entered. "How long was I out?" Eliza asked. "About 12 hours. Caleb's voice was rough. "I checked on you a few times. You didn't move." Eliza sat down across from him. "Did you sleep?" "Some." She doubted that. "What happens now?" Caleb turned the cup slowly in his hands. "I don't know. Victor's not going to let this go. He'll come, probably with the sheriff, and they'll tear it down. Then we stop them." "How?" Caleb looked at her, and the defeat in his eyes was worse than any exhaustion. "It's me against the whole town. I can't win that fight." "You're not alone," Eliza said. "Ben gave me timber," Caleb said. That's one man. Victor has dozens. Then we find more. Caleb shook his head. You don't understand how this works. People are scared of Victor. They won't stand up to him. Not for me. Have you asked them to? What? Have you asked anyone for help? Eliza leaned forward. Or have you just assumed they'd say no? Caleb didn't answer. You've been carrying this alone for so long, you've forgotten what it's like to let someone else shoulder the weight, Eliza said. But you brought me here. You let me help with the dam. Maybe it's time to stop assuming you have to do everything yourself. Caleb stared at her, something working behind his eyes. Then he stood abruptly. I need to go into town. Now? It's almost midnight. I need to talk to people before Victor poisons the well completely. He grabbed his hat. You should stay here. Like hell I should. Caleb paused at the door. Eliza, if you're going to ask for help, you're going to need someone to back up your story, she said. I was there. I helped build it. That means something. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded. Get your coat. They rode into town under a sky thick with stars. Ashford was quiet at this hour, most of the buildings dark. But Caleb guided the wagon to a house on the edge of town and knocked on the door. Ben answered, holding a lamp, his eyes widening when he saw them. Caleb, what's wrong? I need your help, Caleb said. And I need to know who else in this town is tired of Victor Hale deciding what we can and can't do. Ben studied him for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Come in. They sat in Ben's small kitchen while he put coffee on. His wife appeared in a nightgown, took one look at Caleb and Eliza's faces, and started pulling out bread and cheese without being asked. Victor came to see us yesterday, Caleb said. Threatened to use the sheriff to tear down the dam. Ben's jaw tightened. That sounds like him. I know I'm asking a lot, Caleb continued, but I'm out of options. If I'm going to stand up to him, I can't do it alone. What do you need? Witnesses, Caleb said. People willing to say that dam isn't hurting anyone. That Victor's claims about water rights are just an excuse to run me off my land. Ben was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You know what you're asking? Victor doesn't forget. If we go against him, he'll make sure we pay for it. I know. And you think people will risk that? I think some people might be tired of being afraid, Caleb said, echoing Eliza's words. Ben looked at his wife. She nodded slowly. All right, Ben said. I'll ask around, but I can't promise anything. That's all I'm asking for, Caleb said. They left Ben's house and made 2 more stops, a farmer named Jack, who'd lost half his herd to the drought, and a widow named Ruth, who ran the general store. Both listened. Both said they'd think about it. By the time they headed back to the ranch, it was past 2 in the morning. Eliza sat beside Caleb on the wagon, watching him in the darkness. You did good tonight, she said quietly. Caleb didn't respond right away. Then he said, I've spent 2 years trying to make myself invisible, trying not to need anyone, not to ask for anything. I thought that was strength. And now? Now I think maybe I was just scared. Eliza understood that more than he knew. Being scared and doing it anyway, that's the real strength. Caleb glanced at her. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise, Eliza said. I'm just tired of letting fear make my decisions. They rode in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, less heavy, more settled. The next day passed slowly. Caleb tried to work around the ranch, but Eliza could see him watching the road, waiting for Victor or the sheriff, or both. She kept herself busy in the kitchen, baking bread they didn't need just to have something to do with her hands. Near dusk, riders appeared on the horizon. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, and Eliza joined him. But it wasn't Victor. It was Ben, with Jack and Ruth, and 3 other people Eliza didn't recognize. They pulled up in front of the house, and Ben dismounted. Figured you could use some company, he said, in case the sheriff comes calling. Caleb stared at them. You came. We talked it over, Ruth said from her wagon, and we decided we're tired of Victor deciding what's right for this town. One of the men Eliza didn't know spoke up, younger, maybe 30, with a blacksmith's build. He's been squeezing us all for years. Maybe it's time someone pushed back. Caleb looked like he didn't know what to say. This could cost you. Probably will, Ben said, but sitting quiet's been costing us too, just in different ways. Before Caleb could respond, more riders appeared. For a moment, Eliza's heart seized, but it wasn't Victor's men, it was more townspeople. A dozen of them, maybe more, coming from different directions. They gathered in front of the house, and Caleb stood on the porch, looking at faces he'd been avoiding for 2 years. "I don't know what to say," he said finally. "Don't say anything," Jack called out. "Just tell us what you need." The relief on Caleb's face was so raw it hurt to look at. "Thank you," he said quietly. They spent the evening planning. If the sheriff came to tear down the dam, they'd be there. Witnesses, voices, bodies between Victor's power and Caleb's work. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was more than Caleb had had before. As the sun set and people started heading back to town, Ben pulled Caleb aside. "You know this is just the beginning, right? Even if we stop him tomorrow, Victor's not going to forget." "I know," Caleb said. "And you're ready for that fight?" Caleb glanced back at the house, where Eliza was watching from the porch. "I have to be." Ben followed his gaze and smiled. "You're not alone anymore, Caleb. Remember that." After everyone left, Caleb and Eliza sat on the porch as the stars came out. The night was warm, the air finally losing some of its brutal edge. "They came," Caleb said, still sounding faintly amazed. "You gave them a reason to," Eliza replied. "No," Caleb said. "You did. You told me to ask. I wouldn't have done it without you." Eliza shook her head. "All I did was remind you that you don't have to fight alone." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When you showed up on that platform, I thought I was doing you a favor, giving you a way out. Maybe you were, but you ended up saving me instead." Eliza looked at him, at the way exhaustion and hope had carved new lines into his face. "We saved each other," she said. "That's how it works." Caleb held her gaze, and something passed between them, something that had been building since the first stone they'd laid together, the first meal they'd shared in silence, the first moment they'd stopped being strangers and started being partners. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Caleb said quietly, "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I," Eliza said. They sat there as the darkness deepened, two people who'd been broken by different kinds of loss, now bound together by the simple, stubborn refusal to let the world grind them down. And for the first time in a long time, the silence between them felt like hope. Morning came too fast. Eliza woke to the sound of Caleb moving through the house, his footsteps deliberate and heavy. She dressed quickly and found him in the kitchen, standing at the window with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "Some." He didn't turn around. "Ben's coming by at first light. Wants to ride out to the dam with us. Make sure it's still standing." "You think Victor would have torn it down in the night?" "I think Victor does whatever serves him." Caleb finally looked at her. "You don't have to come today. If things get ugly—" "I'm coming," Eliza said flatly. Caleb studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Make coffee. It's going to be a long day." By the time Ben arrived, the sun was barely clearing the horizon, the light thin and pale. He brought Jack with him, the young blacksmith from last night, and a man Eliza recognized from the general store. "Figured we'd check on your handiwork before the show starts," Ben said, climbing down from his wagon. They rode out together, the 4 men and Eliza packed into 2 wagons. The land rolled past, scrub and dust and the endless flat, nothing that stretched to every horizon. Nobody spoke much. The silence had weight to it, the kind that came before something broke. When they reached the basin, Caleb pulled up short. The dam was still standing, but someone had been there. Fresh boot prints circled the structure, dozens of them, overlapping and chaotic. Tools lay scattered near the base, a shovel and pickaxe that hadn't been there before. Ben climbed down and walked the perimeter slowly. "Looks like they started," he said, then stopped. Caleb crouched near one of the boot prints, his jaw tight. "Victor sent men to tear it down." "Why'd they quit?" Jack asked. "Buses." "Because they realized it'd take more than 2 men with hand tools to knock down something built that solid," the store clerk said. He walked up to the dam and slapped a hand against the stone. "This thing's built to last." Caleb straightened, looking at what he and Eliza had created. The dam stood 7 feet tall, its face solid and unyielding, timber bracing locked into clay-packed stone. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. "They'll come back," Caleb said, "with more men, more tools." "Then we'll be here?" Ben said simply. They spent the morning reinforcing what they could, adding clay to spots where the night visitors had chipped away at the base, securing loose stones, checking the timber braces. By midday, the sun was hammering down and they were out of water. We should head back, Ben said. Get supplies, round up anyone else who's willing to stand with us. They were loading the wagons when Eliza saw dust on the southern horizon. Riders, a lot of them. Caleb, she said quietly. He turned, saw what she was seeing, and his whole body went still. Get in the wagon. Caleb, now, Eliza. But it was too late. The riders were already closing in, at least 20 of them, moving fast. Victor Hale rode at the front, the sheriff beside him, a thick man with a star pinned to his vest and a face that suggested he'd stopped caring about right and wrong a long time ago. They pulled up in a loose circle around the dam, blocking any exit. Victor dismounted slowly, making a show of inspecting the structure again. Well, Hayes, he said, you've finished it. I'm almost impressed. Caleb stepped forward, putting himself between Victor and the dam. You're trespassing. Victor laughed. A short, ugly sound. I'm trespassing? That's rich. He gestured to the dam. This thing is obstructing a natural waterway. That's illegal in case you weren't aware. The water wasn't flowing anyway, Ben said. Creek's been dry for months. Doesn't matter, the sheriff said, his voice flat. Law says you need a permit to alter a watercourse. You got a permit, Hayes? You know I don't, Caleb said. Then this structure is illegal. The sheriff pulled a paper from his pocket. I got an order here to remove it. You can step aside, or we can move you. On whose authority? Jack asked, stepping up beside Caleb. Mine, Victor said, and the law's, which, fortunately for all of us, happen to align in this case. That's convenient, Eliza said, her voice cutting through the tension. All eyes turned to her. You control the sheriff, you control the permits, you control who gets water and who doesn't. Must be nice, having that much power. Victor's smile was thin and cold. Careful, miss. You're new here. You don't understand how things work. I understand perfectly, Eliza said. You're a bully with a badge in his pocket. And you're terrified that if Caleb succeeds, other people might get the idea they don't need your permission to survive. Victor's expression darkened. You've got a sharp tongue. Shame it's attached to someone so foolish. He turned back to Caleb. Last chance, Hayes. Step aside or get removed. No. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Victor's jaw tightened. Sheriff? The sheriff sighed like this was all a tedious inconvenience and gestured to his men. Tear it down. 6 men dismounted and started toward the dam with sledgehammers and crowbars. Caleb moved to block them, but Ben grabbed his arm. Wait, Ben said quietly. Look. More riders were appearing on the horizon, from the north this time, coming from town. Within minutes, another 24 people had arrived, pulling their wagons up in a line between Victor's men and the dam. Ruth was there, and the blacksmith's wife, and the farmer who'd lost his cattle. People Eliza had never seen before, people who'd heard somehow that this was the day to choose, climbed down from their wagons and stood shoulder to shoulder. Victor stared at them, his expression shifting from irritation to something harder. What is this? This is us telling you we're done, Ruth said. Her voice was steady, no hesitation. You've been squeezing this town for years, Victor, taking what you want, deciding who gets to make it and who doesn't. Well, Caleb's dam isn't hurting anyone, and we're not letting you tear it down. You don't have a say in this, Victor snapped. Actually, we do, Ben said. See, the law you're citing, it applies to navigable waterways, but this creek's been dry for 6 months. Nothing's navigating it, which means your order is based on a law that doesn't apply. The sheriff's face reddened. That's for a judge to decide. Fine, Jack said. Then take it to a judge, but until you do, nobody's touching that dam. Victor looked at the crowd, at the line of people standing between him and what he wanted, and Eliza saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of doubt. He'd built his power on fear and isolation, on people being too scared or too alone to push back, but now they weren't alone anymore. You're making a mistake, Victor said, his voice low and dangerous. All of you. Maybe, Caleb said, but it's our mistake to make. Victor stared at him for a long moment, his hands curling into fists. Then he turned to the sheriff. Arrest him. Obstruction of justice. The sheriff hesitated, looking at the crowd. Victor, I don't think... I said arrest him. The sheriff took a step forward, and suddenly everyone moved at once. The townspeople surging forward, Victor's men reaching for weapons they weren't quite willing to draw. For a second, the whole thing balanced on the edge of violence. Then a voice cut through the chaos. Stop! Everyone turned. A man in a dark suit was riding toward them from the west, alone, his horse kicking up dust. He pulled up and dismounted with the kind of authority that made even Victor pause. Who the hell are you? Victor demanded. Name's Daniel Ross. I'm a land surveyor out of Austin. He pulled a rolled paper from his saddlebag. I was hired to map the water rights in this county, and I thought you all might be interested in what I found. This doesn't concern you, Victor said. Actually, it does. Ross unrolled the map, holding it up so everyone could see. This creek Hayes is damming, according to the Territorial Survey from 1874. It's classified as an intermittent tributary with no primary water rights assigned. That means it's open water. Anyone can use it, long as they don't interfere with downstream primary rights. He looked at Victor. And since you don't hold primary rights to anything downstream, those belong to the Miller Ranch, which sold out to the territory 5 years ago. Hayes isn't interfering with anything. Victor's face went pale, then red. That survey's 30 years old. Still legally binding, Ross said. I checked with the territorial office before I rode out here. Hayes has every right to build that dam. You, on the other hand, have no legal standing to stop him. The silence that followed was absolute. Victor stared at Ross like he was trying to will him out of existence. Then he turned to the sheriff. Is this true? The sheriff looked at the map, at Ross, at the crowd of people watching him. I'd need to verify. It's true, Ross said. I've got the documentation in my saddlebag if you want to see it. Victor's jaw worked, his hand shaking with barely contained rage. For years, he'd controlled everything through careful manipulation of law and fear. But now the law had turned against him, and fear wasn't enough. This isn't over, Victor said, his voice tight. I think it is, Caleb said quietly. Victor looked at him, and something passed between them. An understanding that the balance had shifted, that the power Victor had held for so long was cracking. He mounted his horse without another word, and his men followed. The sheriff lingered for a moment, looking uncomfortable. I'll need to file a report, he said. You do that, Ben said. The sheriff rode off, leaving the townspeople and Ross standing around the dam in the afternoon heat. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then someone started clapping, slow, deliberate. Others joined in, and soon the whole crowd was applauding, not for any grand victory, but for the simple fact that they'd stood together and refused to break. Caleb stood in the center of it all, looking dazed. Eliza walked over to him. You all right? She asked. I don't know, Caleb said honestly. I was sure we'd lose. We didn't. No. He looked at her, something raw and unguarded in his eyes. We didn't. Ross approached, rolling up his map. You're Hayes? I am. You've got guts, I'll give you that. Ross glanced at the dam. Building this without knowing whether you had legal standing, that's either brave or stupid. Probably both, Caleb admitted. Ross smiled. Well, for what it's worth, you built it in the right place. When the rains come, this basin will fill. You'll have water through the dry season, maybe longer. If the rains come, Caleb said. They will, Ross said. Might not be this year, might not be next, but they always come eventually. He tipped his hat. Good luck to you. He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Caleb and Eliza standing beside the dam they'd built with bleeding hands and stubbornness. The crowd began to disperse, people heading back to town in groups of 2 and 3, their voices rising in relieved conversation. Ben was the last to leave, gripping Caleb's shoulder once before climbing onto his wagon. You did good, Caleb, he said. Real good. Then it was just Caleb and Eliza, standing in the basin as the sun started its long slide toward evening. We should head back, Eliza said, but Caleb didn't move. He stood looking at the dam, at the thing they'd created together out of desperation and defiance, and something broke open in his expression. I thought I'd lost everything, he said quietly. When my wife died, when the drought hit, I thought that was it, that I was just waiting for the end. And now? Now I don't know what I'm doing. He turned to her. But I know I'm not doing it alone anymore. Eliza felt something shift in her chest. Not the sharp pain of the past few weeks, but something deeper, quieter. No, she said. You're not. They stood there for a moment longer, two people who'd been strangers a month ago, now bound by something neither of them quite knew how to name. Then they climbed into the wagon and headed home. The house felt different when they got back, like the walls had exhaled. Eliza made supper while Caleb tended the animals, and when they sat down to eat, the silence between them was comfortable in a way it hadn't been before. What do you think Victor will do now? Eliza asked. Caleb chewed slowly, considering. I don't know. He's not the type to let go of a grudge, but he's also smart enough to know when he's lost a fight. You think he'll leave you alone? I think he'll look for another way to come at me. Caleb set his fork down. But right now, I don't care. Right now, the dam's standing and we're still here. Eliza nodded. That was enough. Later, as she was washing dishes, Caleb appeared in the doorway. I've been thinking, he said. About what? About why you're still here. Eliza turned, drying her hands. What do you mean? When I picked you up at that station, I thought you'd stay a few weeks, earn enough for a train ticket, and leave. But you're still here. Even after everything with Victor, after nearly getting arrested, after working yourself half to death on that dam, you're still here. Eliza met his eyes. Where else would I go? Back east. Somewhere that isn't dying of drought. Somewhere that doesn't have men like Victor Hale trying to crush anyone who stands up. You think I should leave? No, Caleb said quickly. I'm asking why you haven't. Eliza was quiet for a moment, trying to find words for something she hadn't fully named yet. Because, for the first time in a long time, I'm not just surviving, she said finally. I'm building something, and I'm not ready to walk away from that. Caleb absorbed this, something complicated crossing his face. What if the rain never comes? What if we finish that dam and it just sits there empty? Then we'll figure out something else. Eliza stepped closer. You asked me once if I was afraid. The answer is yes. I'm terrified. But I'm more afraid of spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed. Caleb held her gaze, and the air between them felt charged, heavy with things neither of them was quite ready to say. I'm glad you stayed, he said quietly. So am I. So, the moment stretched, neither of them moving, and Eliza felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Then Caleb stepped back, breaking whatever had been building between them. I should check on the barn, he said. Latch has been sticking. All right. He left, and Eliza stood alone in the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly. She knew what was happening, could feel it in the way her chest tightened when he looked at her, in the way his voice changed when he said her name. But knowing and doing something about it were different things. She finished the dishes and went to bed, but sleep was a long time coming. The next few days passed in relative quiet. Caleb worked the ranch, Eliza kept the house running, and neither of them mentioned Victor, or the dam, or the moment in the kitchen that had almost become something else. But word had spread through town. People Eliza had never met started showing up, dropping off supplies, offering to help with repairs, just checking in. The isolation that had defined Caleb's life for 2 years was lifting, replaced by something that looked almost like community. One afternoon, Ruth from the general store arrived with a basket of preserves. She sat at the kitchen table while Eliza made tea, her eyes taking in the clean floors, the mended curtains, the small signs of life returning to the house. Place looks different, Ruth said. Caleb's been working on it. I meant you, Ruth smiled. He's been alone too long. It's good he's got someone now. Eliza felt her face warm. I'm just helping with the house. Sure you are. Ruth's smile widened. And I'm just running a store, not keeping this town from falling apart one canned good at a time. Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she changed the subject. How's business? Better than it was. Ruth accepted the tea Eliza offered. Victor used to control who could buy what, made sure his friends got first pick of everything. But people are starting to push back now. They saw what happened with Caleb, and it gave them ideas. What kind of ideas? The kind where they stop asking permission to live their own lives. Ruth sipped her tea. You and Caleb, what you did out there, it mattered. People needed to see that standing up to Victor was possible. We just built a dam. You did more than that. Ruth set her cup down. You gave people hope. That's worth more than water sometimes. After Ruth left, Eliza stood on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The land stretched out in every direction, harsh and unforgiving, but there was something beautiful in its refusal to pretend to be anything other than what it was. She heard Caleb's footsteps behind her. Ruth came by, Eliza said. I saw. What'd she want? To bring preserves, and to tell me we gave people hope. Caleb was quiet for a moment. You believe that? I don't know. Eliza turned to look at him. Do you? I think people want to believe things can get better, Caleb said slowly, and maybe we showed them it's possible, but hope's easy to lose and hard to keep. Then we keep working, Eliza said. Keep giving them reasons to believe. Caleb studied her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You really think we can do that? I think we don't have a choice. He nodded, and they stood there together as the light faded, two people who'd been broken in different ways, now trying to build something that would last. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house settle, her mind turning over everything that had happened in the past month. She thought about the woman she'd been on that train platform, desperate, defeated, ready to disappear. She thought about the woman she was becoming, stronger, surer, still afraid but no longer paralyzed by it. She thought about Caleb, about the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, about the careful distance he maintained even as the space between them seemed to shrink. She must have finally dozed off, because she woke to the sound of thunder. Eliza sat up, heart pounding, not sure if she'd imagined it. Then it came again, a low rumble that shook the walls. She scrambled out of bed and ran to the window. The sky was black, clouds boiling overhead, lit from within by flashes of lightning. And then she heard it, the sound she'd been waiting for without realizing it. Rain. Not the tentative drizzle that teased and disappeared, but real rain, heavy and insistent, hammering down on the roof like it had something to prove. Eliza ran outside, not bothering with shoes or a coat, and stood in the yard as water poured from the sky. It soaked through her nightgown in seconds, cold and shocking and absolutely perfect. Caleb burst out of the house, his hair plastered to his head, his face split in a grin she'd never seen before. He grabbed her shoulders. It's raining, he shouted over the thunder. I know. Eliza was laughing, crying. She couldn't tell which. The dam! We need to check the dam! They ran for the barn, hitching the horse with shaking hands, and drove through the storm toward the basin. The road had turned to mud, the wagon skidding and sliding, but Caleb kept the horse moving. When they reached the dam, they could barely see through the rain, but they could hear it, water rushing down from the hills, pouring into the basin, crashing against the dam they'd built. Caleb jumped down and ran to the structure, Eliza right behind him. The dam was holding, water rising behind it, already a foot deep and climbing. It's working, Caleb yelled. Eliza pressed her hand against the stone, feeling the water's pressure on the other side, feeling the dam stand firm against it. They'd done this. They'd taken a gamble on a future that might never come, and now it was here, real and roaring and undeniable. Caleb turned to her, rain streaming down his face, and pulled her into a fierce hug. She wrapped her arms around him, holding on like she was afraid the storm might wash them both away. When he finally let go, he kept his hands on her shoulders, his eyes searching hers. We did it, he said. We did it, Eliza agreed. And then, because the moment demanded it, because they'd earned it through blood and exhaustion and refusing to quit, Caleb kissed her. It wasn't gentle or uncertain. It was the kiss of two people who'd been circling each other for weeks, fighting the current, finally giving in. Eliza kissed him back, her hands fisting in his wet shirt, rain pouring over them both. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. I'm sorry, Caleb said. I shouldn't have. Shut up, Eliza said, and kissed him again. They stayed like that for a long moment, the storm raging around them, the dam holding steady behind them. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. Do what? This. Us. I've been alone so long, I don't know how to let someone in. Eliza cupped his face in her hands, making him look at her. Then we'll figure it out together, just like everything else. Caleb closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with something that might have been tears or might have been rain. I don't deserve you. Good thing I'm not asking what you deserve. Eliza smiled. I'm asking what you want. You, Caleb said without hesitation. I want you to stay. Not as help, not as a worker. As... He stopped, struggling. As whatever you want to be, but here, with me. Then that's what I'll be, Eliza said. They stood there as the rain, holding each other while the basin filled behind them. And for the first time since she'd been left on that train platform, Eliza felt like she'd arrived somewhere that mattered. The storm lasted through the night and into the next day. When it finally cleared, the basin was half full, water stretching across what had been cracked earth. The dam stood solid, doing exactly what it was meant to do. Word spread fast. By the afternoon, half the town had ridden out to see it, people standing at the edge of the basin, staring at the water like it was a miracle. Never thought I'd see it, Ben said, standing beside Caleb. You pulled it off, Caleb. Against all odds, you actually pulled it off. Caleb looked at Eliza, standing a few feet away talking to Ruth, and smiled. We pulled it off, he corrected. That evening, back at the ranch, Caleb and Eliza sat on the porch, watching the sunset over land that finally looked like it might survive. The air smelled different, clean, alive, full of possibility. What happens now? Eliza asked. Now we keep going, Caleb said. Fix what's broken. Build what needs building. See what grows. Sounds like a lot of work. It is. Caleb took her hand. But I'm not afraid of work anymore. Not with you here. Eliza squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses they'd earned together. Neither am I. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Two people who'd been lost finding their way to something that looked like home. The rain changed everything, but not in the way Eliza had imagined. The basin filled over the next 3 days, water pooling behind the dam until it looked like a small lake carved into the landscape. Caleb's cattle drank from it, their ribs less visible, their movements less sluggish. The land didn't green overnight, drought didn't work that way, but there was a softening, a sense that the earth had stopped clenching quite so hard. What Eliza hadn't anticipated was how quickly hope could turn into expectation. People started showing up at the ranch. First it was neighbors asking if they could water their cattle at the basin. Caleb said yes without hesitation. Then it was families from town, wanting to see the dam, wanting to touch the water like it might rub off on them. Caleb let them come, patient with their questions, generous with what he had. But on the 5th day after the rain, a man Eliza didn't recognize rode up to the house while Caleb was out checking fences. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of face that looked like it had never seen a hard day. Is Hayes here? He asked, not bothering to dismount. He's working, Eliza said from the porch. Can I help you? The man looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. I heard he's got water, thought he might sell some. The water's not for sale. Everything's for sale if the price is right. The man grinned. Tell Hayes I'll pay fair, better than he'd get from anyone else. I'll tell him you stopped by, Eliza said evenly, but the answer will be the same. The man's grin faded. You his wife. That's not your concern. Just wondering if you got a say in how he runs things, or if you're just the help. He turned his horse. Tell him Marcus Pruitt came by. He'll want to hear what I'm offering. He rode off before Eliza could respond, leaving her standing on the porch with her hands clenched into fists. When Caleb came back that evening, she told him about the visitor. Caleb's expression darkened. Pruitt works for Victor. I figured. What do you want? To buy water. Eliza watched Caleb's face carefully. I told him no. Good. Caleb hung his hat on the peg by the door. Victor's probably scrambling. The rain filled our basin, but it didn't do much for anyone downstream. He's looking for leverage. You think he'll cause trouble? I think he's been causing trouble since the day he got here. Caleb sat at the table rubbing his eyes. But I don't know what to do about it. I can't sell him the water. He'd use it to control everyone else. But if I refuse, he'll find another way to come at me. Eliza sat across from him. What if you don't sell it to him? What if you give it to everyone? Caleb looked up. What do you mean? The basin's big enough to water more than just your cattle. If you let other ranchers use it for free, Victor loses his leverage. He can't buy what you're already giving away. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, turning the idea over. That would cost me. Water's valuable. I could be charging for it. You could, Eliza agreed, but then you'd be doing exactly what Victor does. And the people who helped you stand up to him, they'd see that. Caleb absorbed this, his jaw working. You're right, he said finally. I just hate giving up something we worked so hard for. You're not giving it up, Eliza said. You're sharing it. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. All right, we'll spread the word. Anyone who needs water can come to the basin, no charge. The decision rippled through the county faster than Eliza expected. Within days, ranchers were bringing their herds to the basin, watering them under Caleb's watchful eye. Some offered to pay anyway, but Caleb refused. A few brought supplies instead, feed, tools, things the ranch needed. It became a kind of barter system, informal and organic, built on trust instead of contracts. Victor, predictably, was furious. Eliza heard about it from Ruth, who stopped by one afternoon with news from town. Victor's telling anyone who'll listen that Caleb's trying to undermine him, Ruth said, setting a basket of eggs on the kitchen table. Says giving away water is just a ploy to turn people against him. Is it working? Eliza asked. Depends who you ask. Ruth sat down heavily. Some people are grateful. They see Caleb as a savior, but others, she hesitated, others think he's being reckless, that he's going to run out of water and then everyone will be worse off than before. The basin's deep, Eliza said. Even in a dry year, it should last months. I know that. You know that. But fear doesn't listen to logic. Ruth leaned forward. Be careful, Eliza. Victor's desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. That night, Eliza couldn't shake Ruth's warning. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Caleb moving around in the next room. They hadn't talked about what had happened in the rain, the kiss, the confession, the way everything had shifted between them. They'd fallen into a new rhythm, something more than friendship, but not quite defined. And neither of them seemed willing to name it. She thought about getting up, about knocking on his door and asking what they were doing. But fear held her in place. Not fear of Caleb, but fear of losing what they'd built by asking for more than it could hold. The next morning brought trouble in the form of the sheriff. Eliza was feeding the chickens when she saw him riding up, alone this time, his face set in grim lines. Caleb was at the barn, and he came out when he heard the horse. Sheriff, Caleb said, his voice neutral. Hayes. The sheriff dismounted, keeping his hands visible. Got a complaint I need to follow up on. What kind of complaint? Victor Hale says you're operating an unlicensed water distribution business. Says you're violating territorial commerce laws. Caleb's laugh was harsh and humorless. I'm not selling anything. I'm letting people water their cattle. For free? That's right. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. See, that's the problem. Law says if you're providing a service to the public, you need a license. Doesn't matter if you're charging or not. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Caleb said flatly. Maybe so, but it's the law. The sheriff pulled out a folded paper. I got an order here to shut down your operation until you file the proper paperwork. And how long will that take? 6 months, maybe more. The sheriff wouldn't meet Caleb's eyes. I'm sorry, Caleb. I know this is Victor pulling strings, but my hands are tied. Caleb took the paper, staring at it like it might catch fire. So I'm supposed to turn away people who need water because Victor found a loophole? You're supposed to follow the law. The law, Caleb said slowly, seems to work real well for men like Victor and real poorly for everyone else. The sheriff had no answer to that. He mounted his horse, looking miserable. I'll give you 3 days to comply. After that, I'll have to start fining you. He rode off, and Caleb stood in the yard holding the paper like it was poison. Eliza walked over to him. What are you going to do? I don't know. Caleb's voice was tight with frustration. If I stop letting people use the water, Victor wins. But if I keep going, the fines will bankrupt me. What about the paperwork? Can you file for the license? In 6 months? By then the drought could be back. People need water now, not half a year from now. He crumpled the paper in his fist. Victor's got me cornered, and he knows it. Eliza thought fast, her mind racing through possibilities. What if you don't operate it? What if the town does? Caleb looked at her. What? The law says you can't provide a public service without a license. But what if it's not you providing it? What if the basin becomes common property, owned by the town, managed by the town, with you as just one of the stakeholders? Caleb stared at her. You think that would work? I think it's worth asking someone who knows the law better than Victor's sheriff. They rode into town that afternoon and found Daniel Ross, the surveyor, at the boarding house. He listened to Eliza's idea, his expression thoughtful. "It's clever," he said finally. "If the basin is held in common trust, with multiple owners, then it's not a commercial operation. It's a community resource, like a town well." "Can we do that?" Caleb asked. "You'd need to file articles of incorporation, establish a board of trustees, transfer ownership from yourself to the trust." Ross pulled out a notebook and started sketching. "It's complicated, but it's legal, and it gets you out from under Victor's thumb." "How long would it take?" 2 weeks, maybe 3, if we move fast and file in Austin instead of going through the territorial office here." Ross looked up. "But you'd be giving up sole ownership of that water, Caleb. Once it's in trust, you don't get to make all the decisions anymore." Caleb glanced at Eliza. She could see him weighing it. Control versus community, power versus partnership. "I didn't build that dam to own something," Caleb said finally. "I built it to survive. If putting it in trust means everyone survives, then that's what we do." Ross smiled. "Then let's get started." Over the next 2 weeks, Caleb's life became a storm of paperwork and meetings. Ross drafted the documents, but Caleb had to gather signatures from people willing to serve as trustees. He rode from ranch to ranch, explaining the plan, asking for support. Most people agreed immediately. A few hesitated, worried about Victor's retaliation, but eventually came around. By the end of the first week, Caleb had 12 trustees signed on: ranchers, townspeople, even Ruth from the general store. Eliza watched him work himself to exhaustion, riding out each morning and coming back after dark, his face drawn but determined. She kept the house running, made sure he ate, and tried not to think about what would happen if Victor found a way to block this too. On the 10th day, Victor made his move. Caleb was in town filing papers at the land office when Victor walked in with 3 men Eliza recognized from the showdown at the dam. She was with Caleb, and she felt the temperature in the room drop. "Hayes," Victor said pleasantly, "I heard you're trying to give away what doesn't belong to you." "The water belongs to whoever needs it," Caleb said without turning around. "That's a nice sentiment. Unfortunately, I've been looking into the survey Ross showed us." Victor pulled out his own set of papers. "Turns out there's a discrepancy. The 1874 survey Ross cited, it was superseded by an 1882 revision that reclassified that creek as a primary tributary, which means it does have assigned water rights. Mine." Caleb turned slowly. "You're lying. I'm reading territorial records." Victor held up the papers. "According to this, I hold primary rights to all water flowing through Section 12, which includes your basin. That means every drop in that dam legally belongs to me." Ross appeared from the back office, his face pale. "Let me see those." Victor handed them over with a smug smile. Ross read quickly, his expression growing grimmer. "Is it real?" Caleb asked. Ross nodded slowly. "It's real. Filed in 1882, signed by the territorial governor." He looked up at Victor. "How did you even know about this?" "I make it my business to know things." Victor's smile widened. "So here's how this is going to work, Hayes. You shut down your little charity operation, you file for the proper licenses under my supervision, and you pay me a licensing fee for every gallon of my water you use. Or," he paused for effect, "I file a claim for damages and sue you for everything you've got." "You can't do that," Eliza said, stepping forward. "I can do whatever the law allows, miss, and the law is very clear." Victor turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, and Hayes, that trust you're trying to set up? It won't help. You can't put stolen property in trust. The water's mine, which means the dam is built on my rights. I could have it torn down tomorrow if I wanted." He walked out, his men following, and the silence in the land office was suffocating. Caleb stood frozen, the color draining from his face. "Tell me there's a way around this." Ross read the documents again, his mouth a tight line. "I don't know. This changes everything. If Victor holds primary rights, then legally, He stopped, shaking his head. "I need to research this. There might be a challenge we can file, some kind of grandfather clause, but it'll take time," Caleb finished. "Time Victor won't give us." "I'm sorry, Caleb." Caleb walked out without another word. Eliza followed, finding him standing in the street, staring at nothing. "Caleb, I thought we'd won," he said quietly. I thought for once I'd actually beaten him. Maybe there's still a way. There's no way, Eliza. Caleb's voice cracked. He's got the law on his side, he's got money, he's got power, and I've got a dam full of water that doesn't belong to me, and a ranch that's 3 bad months from foreclosure. So what are you going to do? Caleb looked at her, and the defeat in his eyes was worse than any anger. I don't know. For the first time since you showed up on that platform, I genuinely don't know. They rode home in silence. When they reached the ranch, Caleb went straight to the barn and didn't come out. Eliza made supper, but he didn't come in to eat. She sat alone at the table, pushing food around her plate, feeling the weight of everything they'd built starting to crumble. Near midnight, she heard the barn door open. She got up and found Caleb sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands. You need to eat, she said quietly. I'm not hungry. Eliza sat beside him. Talk to me. What's there to say? Caleb's voice was hollow. I spent 2 years letting this place die because I didn't have the strength to save it. Then you showed up, and I thought maybe I could turn things around, build something that mattered, but I was kidding myself. Victor's always going to win because men like him always do. That's not true, isn't it? Caleb looked at her. Look at what's happened. Every time I take a step forward, he finds a way to push me back twice as far. The dam, the trust, all of it. It was just buying time, and now time's up. So you're giving up? I'm being realistic. Eliza felt something snap inside her. Not anger exactly, but a refusal to accept what he was saying. The Caleb Hayes I met 6 weeks ago would have said that. He would have sat on this porch and convinced himself he deserved to lose. But the man who built that dam? Who stood up to Victor in front of the whole town? Who asked people to trust him when he barely trusted himself? She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. That man doesn't quit. That man's a fool, Caleb said bitterly. Maybe. But he's my fool, and I'm not letting him disappear. Eliza's grip tightened. You told me once that doing nothing felt worse than failing. Do you still believe that? Caleb was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I don't know what to do, Eliza. I don't know how to fight someone who controls everything. Then we find another way to fight. Eliza stood, pulling him to his feet. Come inside. Eat something, and tomorrow we figure out what Victor doesn't control. Caleb let her lead him inside, let her put food in front of him, let her sit across the table, and refused to look away until he started eating. And slowly, some of the defeat in his eyes began to fade. What if we go public? Eliza said after a while. What do you mean? Victor's power comes from controlling information, from making deals in back rooms where nobody sees. But what if we make this public? Call a town meeting, show everyone the documents, let them see exactly what Victor's trying to do. He'll just spin it, Caleb said. Make himself look like the victim. Maybe. But people aren't stupid. They know who Victor is. And if we lay out the facts, the survey, the water rights, the timing of when he suddenly discovered this 1882 revision, some of them will see through it. Caleb thought about this. Even if they do, it doesn't change the law. No, Eliza admitted. But it changes the story. Right now, Victor's controlling the narrative. He's making you look like a thief. But if we show people what's really happening, if we make him defend his actions in front of the town, we take away his power to operate in the shadows, Caleb finished. Something flickered in his expression, not hope exactly, but the possibility of it. You think it'll work? I think it's better than sitting here waiting for him to destroy us. Caleb nodded slowly. All right, we'll call a meeting, see who shows up. Word spread fast. By the next afternoon, half the county knew there'd be a town meeting at the church hall on Saturday. Ruth helped spread the news, and Ben made sure every rancher within 20 miles heard about it. By the time Saturday arrived, Eliza could feel the tension crackling through town like lightning waiting to strike. The hall was packed. Every seat was filled, people standing along the walls, more crowding the doorway. Caleb stood at the front, Eliza beside him, facing a sea of faces. Some friendly, some curious, some openly hostile. Victor sat in the front row, flanked by his men, his expression calm and confident. The mayor, a thin man named Morris, who everyone knew was in Victor's pocket, called the meeting to order. Hayes requested this gathering, he said, so I suppose we'll hear what he has to say. Caleb stepped forward. For a moment he just stood there, and Eliza could see him gathering his courage. Then he spoke. "Most of you know about the dam I built," he said. "You know I opened it to anyone who needed water. And you probably heard that Victor claims I'm breaking the law." He paused. "What you might not know is why." He laid out the timeline, the original survey Ross had found, the showdown at the dam, the trust they'd tried to establish. Then he pulled out Victor's documents. 3 days ago, Victor produced a revision to the water rights survey, a revision from 1882 that supposedly gives him ownership of the water in my basin. Caleb held up the papers. "Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "That revision is a matter of public record," Victor said smoothly, standing. "It's not my fault Hayes didn't do his research before building his dam." "Funny thing about that revision," Caleb said, "I had Ross look into when it was filed. Turns out it was filed on March 15th, 1882. You know what else happened in March 1882? He waited, letting the silence build. Victor Hale bought his first parcel of land in this county from the territorial governor's office. The same office that filed this revision. Caleb let that sink in. So either it's an amazing coincidence or Victor's been sitting on this document for 5 years, waiting for the right moment to use it. The murmurs grew louder. Victor's smile slipped slightly. "That doesn't prove anything," Victor said. "No," Caleb agreed. "But it raises questions. Like why you didn't mention this revision when Ross first showed his survey. Why you waited until after I'd built the dam, after I'd opened it to the community, after I'd started setting up a trust. Why you waited until I'd invested everything I had and then suddenly produced a document that makes all of it illegal." "Because I didn't know about it until recently," Victor said, his voice hardening. "You're a land baron who's bought half this county, and you didn't know about a water rights revision filed 5 years ago?" Caleb shook his head. "I don't believe that, and I don't think anyone else here does either." People were looking at Victor now, really looking, and Eliza could see doubt creeping into their expressions. Victor stood, his face flushed. "This is ridiculous. I came here tonight as a courtesy, to try to work this out peacefully. But if Hayes wants to make accusations—" "I'm not making accusations," Caleb interrupted. "I'm asking questions. Questions like, if that water legally belongs to you, what are you planning to do with it? Sell it to the highest bidder? Use it to control who succeeds and who fails in this county?" "I plan to manage it responsibly," Victor said coldly. "The way you've managed everything else you own," Ruth spoke up from the crowd. "By deciding who gets to buy what at my store? By controlling the bank so you can foreclose on anyone who crosses you?" Other voices joined in, people sharing stories. Loans called in early, supplies withheld, land sold at auction before owners knew they were in default. The hall erupted into a cacophony of anger and frustration, years of resentment boiling over. Victor's face went from red to white. "This meeting is over," he said, pushing toward the door. But Caleb's voice cut through the noise. "Running away won't change the truth, Victor. You've been controlling this town through fear for too long, but people are starting to see through it." Victor turned at the door, his eyes blazing. "You want the truth, Hayes? Fine. That dam is built on my water rights. Either you pay me rent for every gallon you use, or I file an injunction on Monday and have the sheriff tear it down. Your choice." He stormed out, his men scrambling to follow. The hall fell silent. Then Ben stood up. "I say we fight him," Ben said. "How?" someone called out. "He's got the law on his side." "Maybe," Ben said, "but he doesn't have us. And last I checked, there's more of us than there are of him." Slowly, other people stood. Ruth, Jack, the farmers and ranchers who'd used Caleb's water, who'd watched him stand up when everyone else stayed quiet. "What do you need?" Ruth asked Caleb. Caleb looked around the room, at faces that had been strangers a month ago, now standing with him against a common enemy. "I need time," he said. "Time for Ross to find a legal challenge. Time to figure out if there's a way to fight this that doesn't end with all of us losing." "Then we'll buy you time," Jack said. "Whatever it takes." The meeting dissolved into planning, people volunteering to research old records, others offering to stand watch at the dam in case Victor tried something. By the time everyone left, Caleb had a plan that was half hope and half desperation, but it was more than he'd had before. Walking back to the ranch, Eliza slipped her hand into Caleb's. He squeezed it tight. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not letting me quit." Eliza stopped walking, turning to face him. I told you once that I stayed because I was building something. I meant it. And I'm not about to let Victor Hale take that away from us. Caleb pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I don't know how this ends, Eliza. Neither do I, she admitted. But we'll face it together. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other against the uncertainty of everything to come. And for that moment at least, it was enough. Sunday morning arrived with heavy clouds building on the western horizon. Caleb stood on the porch watching them, coffee growing cold in his hand. Victor's deadline was tomorrow. 24 hours to decide whether to surrender everything or watch it get torn down. Eliza joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool wind that had started blowing in. Storm coming, she said. Big one by the looks of it. Caleb set his cup on the railing. Might be the last rain we see for months. They both understood what that meant. If the basin filled again before Victor seized control, it would carry them through the dry season. If it didn't, they'd be at his mercy regardless of what the law said. Ross is still looking for a challenge to file, Eliza said. He sent word last night. There might be a precedent from New Mexico territory that could help. Might, Caleb repeated. That's a thin word to hang everything on. It's what we have. Caleb turned to look at her, really look at her, taking in the determination in her eyes and the set of her jaw. You know what I keep thinking about? What? That day I found you on the platform. You had every reason to give up. More reason than I did, probably. But you didn't. You took the hardest choice available and made it work. He reached for her hand. I don't know if I ever thanked you for that. For what? Being desperate? For showing me what it looks like to keep fighting when you've got nothing left. Caleb squeezed her hand. I'd forgotten. After my wife died, I stopped. But you didn't. And watching you refuse to quit made me remember how. Eliza felt something catch in her throat. We saved each other, remember? That's what I said. I know, but I think you saved me first. Before Eliza could respond, they heard horses approaching. Multiple riders, coming fast. Caleb's hand moved instinctively to his hip, but he wasn't wearing a gun. It was Ben, with Ruth and Jack, and at least a dozen others. They pulled up in front of the house, their faces grim. Town's talking, Ben said without preamble. Victor's been making the rounds, telling people that anyone who helps you is breaking the law. Aiding and abetting theft, he's calling it. That's insane, Eliza said. Doesn't matter if it's insane, it's working. Ruth climbed down from her wagon. Half the people who stood with you last night are getting cold feet. They're scared Victor will come after them next. Can he do that? Caleb asked. Legally? Who cares about legally? Jack said bitterly. Victor doesn't need the law when he's got enough money to bury people in court costs until they break. Caleb felt the ground shifting under him again. So what are you saying? That we're on our own? No, Ben said firmly. We're saying it's worse than we thought, but we're still here. How many? Caleb asked quietly. Ben glanced at the others. Us. Maybe 5 or 6 more families who aren't scared off yet. Against Victor and everyone on his payroll. He paused. It's not good odds, Caleb. The wind picked up, gusting hard enough to rattle the porch boards. The storm was getting closer. I can't ask you to do this, Caleb said. If Victor's threatening legal action. You're not asking, Ruth interrupted. We're choosing. There's a difference. Ruth's right, Jack said. We're tired of Victor deciding what we're allowed to do. If this is where we make our stand, then this is where we make it. Caleb looked at their faces. Weathered, determined, scared, but refusing to show it. These weren't heroes or saints. They were just people who decided that fear was more expensive than courage. All right, he said. Then we prepare. If Victor comes tomorrow with the sheriff, we'll be ready. They spent the rest of Sunday fortifying the dam. Not with weapons, nobody wanted bloodshed, but with presence. They set up tents near the basin, built fires, established a rotating watch. It was a message. You'll have to go through us to tear this down. By evening, word had spread. A few more families showed up, then a few more. By nightfall, there were nearly 30 people camped around the dam, their firelight reflecting off the water. Caleb walked among them, talking quietly, thanking them, trying not to show how terrified he was that someone might get hurt because of his stubbornness. Eliza found him sitting alone near the water's edge after midnight. You should sleep, she said. Can't. Caleb tossed a stone into the basin, watching the ripples spread. Keep thinking about what happens tomorrow. We stand together, we don't let them tear it down. And if the sheriff arrests us all? If Victor brings enough men that we can't stop them without fighting? Caleb turned to her. I built this thing to save the ranch, but if people get hurt defending it, what's the point? Eliza sat beside him, their shoulders touching. The point is you gave people something to believe in, something worth protecting. That matters, Caleb, even if we lose. I don't want to lose you in the process. You won't. Eliza took his hand. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That's the promise. They sat in silence, watching the firelight dance across the water, both of them trying to hold on to the moment before everything changed. Dawn came gray and heavy, the storm clouds building into towers that blotted out the eastern sky. The camp stirred slowly, people emerging from tents, building up fires, brewing coffee. The mood was tense, everyone watching the southern horizon for dust that would signal Victor's arrival. He came at mid-morning with a small army, 20 men on horseback, the sheriff riding beside Victor, and behind them a wagon loaded with tools, sledgehammers, pickaxes, ropes, enough equipment to tear down a dam twice the size of Caleb's. The townspeople formed a line between the approaching riders and the basin, Caleb and Eliza at the center. Nobody spoke. They just stood there, arms linked, facing down the power that had controlled their lives for so long. Victor pulled up 10 feet away and dismounted slowly, surveying the crowd with cold eyes. Well, he said, this is touching. A whole community coming together to protect stolen property. It's not stolen, Caleb said, and you know it. What I know is that I hold legal water rights to this basin, and you've been illegally using what belongs to me. Victor gestured to the sheriff. Show them the injunction. The sheriff unfolded a document, his voice monotone as he read. By order of the territorial court, Caleb Hayes is hereby ordered to cease all water extraction from the basin, known as Hayes Basin, to dismantle any structures impeding natural water flow, and to remit all fees owed for unauthorized usage. How much? Someone called from the crowd. $1,200, the sheriff said, plus court costs. A gasp rippled through the gathering. $1,200 was more than most families made in a year. You know I don't have that, Caleb said. Then the dam comes down, Victor said simply. And the property will be auctioned to recover damages. I've already prepared a bid. Of course you have, Eliza said, her voice cutting. That's what this has been about from the start. You don't want the water, you want the land. Caleb's ranch sits right in the middle of your holdings, and it's the one piece you couldn't buy or steal, so you created a crisis to take it. Victor's smile was thin. Careful, miss. Slander is actionable. Truth isn't slander. Eliza stepped forward, and Caleb tried to pull her back, but she shook him off. You filed that revision 5 years ago and sat on it, waiting for the right moment. You probably didn't even know about this basin until Caleb built the dam. But once you saw it working, saw how much water it could hold, you realized it was valuable. So you dusted off your old documents and manufactured a legal claim. That's an interesting theory, Victor said. Can you prove any of it? Can you prove you didn't? Eliza challenged. The crowd murmured and Victor's expression darkened. I don't have to prove anything. I have a court order. Sheriff? The sheriff cleared his throat. Everyone needs to clear the area. We're taking down the dam. Anyone who interferes will be arrested for obstruction. Nobody moved. I said clear the area, the sheriff barked. Still nobody moved. Caleb felt his heart hammering, felt Eliza's hand tight in his, felt the weight of responsibility for everyone standing with him. Sheriff, Ben called out, you really going to arrest 30 people for standing on public land? This isn't public land, Victor said. Actually, a new voice said, it is. Everyone turned. Daniel Ross was riding toward them from the east, and he wasn't alone. Behind him came a wagon driven by a woman in a dark dress, severe, professional, carrying herself with the kind of authority that made even Victor pause. Ross dismounted, his face alight with something that looked like vindication. Everyone, this is Judge Patricia Moreland from the Territorial Circuit Court. She's been reviewing the case. Victor's face went pale. What is this? Judge Moreland climbed down from the wagon, surveying the scene with sharp eyes. Mr. Hale, Sheriff, I understand you're here to enforce an injunction regarding water rights. That's correct, Your Honor, the sheriff said quickly. On what grounds? The 1882 revision that grants Mr. Hale primary rights to— I've reviewed that revision, Judge Moreland interrupted, along with the original survey and about a dozen other documents Mr. Ross brought to my attention. Do you want to know what I found? Victor said nothing. The 1882 revision you're citing was never ratified, Judge Moreland said. It was filed by a clerk in the territorial office, but it never went through the proper approval process. It was supposed to be reviewed by the Land Commission within 60 days of filing. That review never happened. That's a technicality, Victor said. It's the law, Judge Moreland corrected. An unratified revision has no legal standing, which means the original survey from 1874 is still the governing document. And according to that survey, this water is unassigned. She looked at Caleb. Mr. Hayes has as much right to it as anyone. The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone in the crowd started laughing, a sound of pure, relieved joy. Others joined in, and suddenly everyone was laughing, crying, embracing each other. Victor stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, rage, and finally resignation. There must be some mistake. The mistake was assuming nobody would check your work, Judge Moreland said coldly. You've been using an invalid document to bully people for years, Mr. Hale. That ends now. I have lawyers, and I have jurisdiction, Judge Moreland said. If you want to appeal, you're welcome to do so through proper channels. But as of this moment, that injunction is void, and any attempt to enforce it will result in contempt charges. She turned to the sheriff. I suggest you take your men and go home. The sheriff looked at Victor, who stood there trembling with fury. You heard the judge, the sheriff muttered, mounting his horse. His men followed, leaving Victor standing alone. This isn't over, Victor said, his voice shaking. Yes, Caleb said quietly. It is. Victor stared at him for a long moment, then climbed onto his horse and rode off without another word. The crowd erupted. People were cheering, crying, embracing. Ben grabbed Caleb in a crushing hug, and Ruth was hugging Eliza, and everyone was talking at once. Judge Moreland approached Caleb, her severe expression softening slightly. Mr. Ross showed me what you've been trying to build here. The trust, the community ownership. It's good work. Thank you, Your Honor, Caleb managed. I'll expedite the paperwork, she said. Within 2 weeks, that basin will be officially held in common trust, managed by your board of trustees. Victor won't be able to touch it. I don't know how to thank you. Thank Mr. Ross. He's the one who rode to Austin to find me. She glanced at the gathering storm. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to get back to town before that hits. She climbed back into her wagon and left, Ross riding beside her. The celebration continued, but Caleb stepped away, walking to the water's edge. Eliza found him there, standing alone. You did it, she said. We did it, Caleb corrected. I couldn't have— His voice broke. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Eliza wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her head against his back. I know. They stood like that while the storm rolled in, thunder rumbling across the basin, lightning forking through the clouds. The first drops of rain started falling, fat and heavy, and within minutes it was pouring. The crowd scattered to their tents, but Caleb and Eliza stayed where they were, getting soaked, watching the basin fill. The dam held firm, water rising behind it, spilling over the edges in controlled streams exactly as designed. It's working, Caleb said, wonder in his voice. It's working, Eliza agreed. He turned to face her, rain streaming down both their faces. Marry me. Eliza blinked. What? Marry me, Caleb repeated. Not because you need a roof or because I need help. Marry me because I can't imagine doing any of this without you, because you're the strongest, smartest, most stubborn person I've ever met, and I love you. Eliza stared at him, her heart pounding. You love me? I love you, Caleb said. I think I started falling for you the day you told me I didn't have to fight alone. I just didn't know how to say it until now. Eliza laughed, a sound halfway between joy and tears. You could have picked a less dramatic moment. Could have, Caleb agreed. But this felt right. Standing here with you, watching everything we built together working exactly like it's supposed to. He took her hands. So what do you say? Eliza looked at him. This man who'd been broken and had chosen to heal, who'd been afraid and had chosen to fight, who'd been alone and had chosen to let her in. She thought about the woman she'd been on that train platform, how lost and desperate she'd felt. She thought about the woman she was now, standing in the rain beside the man she loved, surrounded by a community they'd helped build. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Caleb pulled her close and kissed her, and somewhere in the background someone started cheering. They broke apart to find half the camp watching, grinning like fools. "About damn time!" Ben shouted. The rain poured harder, and Caleb and Eliza stood there laughing, holding each other while thunder rolled across the basin and the future spread out before them like the land itself, vast, challenging, and full of promise. The storm lasted 3 days. By the time it cleared, the basin was filled to capacity, water stretching across the depression like a small lake. The surrounding land drank deep, and within a week the first green shoots started appearing in places that had been brown for months. True to her word, Judge Moreland expedited the trust paperwork. 2 weeks after the showdown, Caleb signed the basin over to the Hayes Basin Water Trust, with 12 trustees representing ranchers, townspeople, and local businesses. The first meeting was held in the church hall, and they established rules for usage, maintenance, and expansion. Victor Hale didn't attend. In fact, Victor seemed to disappear from public life altogether. Rumors circulated that he was selling off properties, consolidating what he could before more of his legal manipulations came to light. Some said he was leaving the territory entirely. Nobody knew for sure, and nobody cared enough to find out. Caleb's ranch began to transform. With reliable water, his cattle thrived. He replanted fields that had gone fallow, repaired fences, fixed the barn roof. Eliza turned the house into a home. Curtains in the windows, flowers in the yard, bread baking every morning. They were married in early October, in the same church hall where Caleb had stood up to Victor. The whole town showed up. Ruth provided the cake, Ben gave Eliza away since she had no family, and Jack played fiddle while people danced under lanterns strung between the rafters. Standing at the altar, looking at Eliza in a simple dress she'd sewn herself, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just happiness, but contentment. The kind that came from knowing you'd built something real with someone who understood the cost. As winter approached, the community around the basin continued to grow. More families moved to the area, drawn by the promise of reliable water. A second dam was proposed for the following spring, with Caleb consulting on the design. The trust became a model for other drought-stricken counties, and Ross brought engineers from Austin to study what they'd built. But for Caleb and Eliza, the real transformation was quieter, more personal. It was in the way they moved through the house together, the easy rhythm they'd developed. It was in the conversations over dinner, planning for the future instead of just surviving the present. It was in the way Caleb would reach for her hand without thinking, and the way Eliza would smile at him across a crowded room. And both of them would remember where they'd started and how far they'd come. One evening in late November, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the basin. The water reflected the orange and pink sky, and in the distance they could see cattle grazing on land that was finally recovering. "I've been thinking," Eliza said. "About what?" "About why this worked. The dam, the trust, all of it." She leaned against him. "I think it's because we stopped trying to do it alone. We asked for help, we let people in, we built something bigger than just us." Caleb nodded slowly. "I spent 2 years thinking strength meant not needing anyone. Turns out it's the opposite. Strength is admitting you can't do it alone and trusting others to stand with you. And being willing to stand with them when they need it," Eliza added. "It goes both ways." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. Then Caleb said, "I never thanked the man who didn't show up." Eliza turned to look at him. "What?" "The man who was supposed to marry you. If he'd been at that station, if he'd followed through on his promise, you never would have needed my help. And I never would have found you." Caleb squeezed her hand. "So in a strange way, his cowardice gave me everything." Eliza smiled. "I used to be angry at him, angry at how disposable he made me feel, but now?" She shook her head. "Now I'm grateful, because he was right to walk away. We wouldn't have worked. He wanted someone to fit into his life, and I needed someone to build a life with. That's you." "That's us," Caleb corrected. They watched the last light disappear, the stars emerging one by one. Somewhere in the distance, they heard voices. Neighbors working late, children playing, the sounds of a community that had learned to rely on each other. "You know what I realized?" Eliza said. "People think survival is about being tough enough to stand alone. But that's not survival. That's just slow dying. Real survival is knowing when to reach out, when to accept help, when to build something together that none of you could build alone. Caleb thought about that, about how close he'd come to dying slowly in this house, cut off from everyone, convinced that isolation was the only way to protect what little he had left. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "We saved each other," Eliza said for what felt like the 100th time. "That's the point. Neither of us could have done this alone. But together?" She gestured at the land around them, at the water reflecting starlight, at the life they'd built. "Together, we did the impossible." Winter came gentle that year, the rains continuing in measured doses that kept the basin full and the land soft. Caleb and Eliza worked through the cold months, making plans for spring planting, helping other ranchers prepare for calving season, attending trust meetings where they argued about maintenance schedules and expansion plans. It wasn't perfect. There were disagreements about water allocation, fights about who got access during dry spells, tension when new families moved in and wanted immediate inclusion. But they worked through it, all of them, learning as they went that community wasn't something you built once and walked away from. It was something you tended, like crops or cattle, with patience and attention and the willingness to compromise. By the time spring arrived, Eliza was pregnant. They didn't tell anyone at first, holding the secret close like something too precious to share. But eventually her body betrayed them, and Ruth figured it out when Eliza couldn't stomach coffee anymore. "You're going to be a father," Ruth said to Caleb, grinning wide. Caleb stood there stunned, watching Eliza across the store, and something bloomed in his chest. Joy mixed with terror, mixed with a fierce, protective love that took his breath away. That night, lying in bed with Eliza curled against him, Caleb said, "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of being a father. Of messing it up. Of losing you the way I lost." He couldn't finish. Eliza took his hand and placed it on her belly, still flat but holding their future. "You're not going to lose me, and you're not going to mess this up. You know how I know?" "How?" "Because you're already a better man than the one I met on that platform. You've learned how to let people in, how to ask for help, how to build instead of just survive." She kissed him softly. "That's what our child needs, not perfection, just someone willing to try." Caleb held her close, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of hope tangling together. "I'm going to try so hard." "I know," Eliza said. "We both will." The baby came in early December, a girl they named Sarah after Caleb's mother. She was small and loud and perfect, and when the doctor placed her in Caleb's arms for the first time, he wept like he hadn't wept since his first wife died. But these were different tears, not grief, but overwhelming gratitude for the second chance he'd been given, for the family he'd thought he'd never have again. Eliza watched him holding their daughter, and she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The train platform where she'd waited for a man who never came. The ranch where she'd found work and then purpose. The dam they'd built together against impossible odds. The community that had risen around them. All of it had been necessary. Every moment of despair, every act of courage, every decision to keep going when giving up would have been easier. It had all led to this, a house full of light and life, a man who'd learned to love again, a woman who'd discovered her own strength, and a child who would grow up surrounded by the community her parents had helped build. As winter deepened and Sarah grew, Caleb and Eliza settled into the rhythm of new parenthood. Sleepless nights and small miracles, exhaustion and joy in equal measure. The ranch continued to thrive, the basin held steady, and the trust expanded to include 3 more dams across the county. Victor Hale left Texas entirely, moving to California according to reports. Nobody missed him. The bank that had been under his control was bought by a consortium of local ranchers, and suddenly loans became available to people who'd been shut out for years. The town began to grow, new businesses opening, new families arriving, drawn by the promise of water and community. One evening in late spring, when Sarah was 6 months old, the whole town gathered at the basin for a celebration. They'd built a proper spillway, reinforced the dam with concrete, and planted trees along the shoreline. It looked permanent now, like it had always been there, like the land had simply decided to hold water in that particular spot. Caleb stood with Eliza, Sarah asleep in her arms, and watched people swimming and fishing and laughing. Children splashed in the shallows while their parents talked in groups, planning future projects, sharing stories, being the kind of community that Victor had tried so hard to prevent. "You did this," Eliza said quietly. We did this, Caleb corrected automatically.
No, Eliza said, looking at him. I mean, yes, we did. But you started it. You could have walked away from me on that platform.
You could have given up when Victor threatened you. You could have torn down the dam when things got hard. But you didn't. You chose to fight, even when you were scared. That's what made all of this possible. Caleb looked out at the water, at the people, at the life that had bloomed where there'd been only dust and despair. I think about that day a lot, he said. The day I found you waiting. I told myself I was doing you a favor, giving you a way out. But the truth is, I was looking for a reason to care again. I just didn't know it until you said yes. I said yes because I didn't have a choice, Eliza admitted. But I stayed because I found something worth choosing. You gave me that.
Sarah stirred in her sleep, making a small sound, and they both looked down at her, this perfect, impossible thing they'd created together. What do you think we should tell her, Tia? Caleb asked. When she's old enough to understand? The truth, Eliza said, that she was born from two people who refused to give up, that her father built something from nothing because he believed it was possible, that her mother learned strength doesn't mean standing alone, it means knowing when to reach out.
And that community isn't given, Caleb added. It's built, one act of courage at a time. They stood together as the sun set, painting the basin gold and orange, and around them the community they'd helped create continued to grow and thrive, imperfect, messy, real, and resilient. Years later, when Sarah was old enough to ask questions, Caleb would walk her to the dam and tell her the story. He'd tell her about the drought that nearly killed them, about the woman who appeared when everything seemed lost, about the choice to build instead of surrender. He'd tell her about standing up to men who thought power meant control, and discovering that real power came from people standing together. And he'd tell her the most important thing he'd learned, that life doesn't give you what you deserve. It gives you what you refuse to stop fighting for. The dam, the ranch, the community, the love. None of it had been earned through virtue or goodness. It had been claimed through stubbornness, through the willingness to keep trying when failure seemed certain, through the courage to ask for help and the grace to accept it. But on that spring evening, with Sarah sleeping in Eliza's arms and the water reflecting the last light of day, Caleb didn't think about the future or the past. He thought about the present, about the moment he was living right now, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with him, beside the woman who'd saved him by letting him save her, holding the child who represented every impossible thing he'd dared to hope for. The storm clouds that had threatened all day finally broke, sending people running for cover, laughing and shrieking. But Caleb and Eliza stayed where they were, rain falling on them like a benediction, and they watched the basin fill even higher, overflowing its banks in a controlled flood that would feed the land for months to come. This was what winning looked like. Not perfection or easy triumph, but the hard-earned peace of knowing you'd fought for something that mattered and refused to let it die. The scars were still there, in Caleb's hands, in Eliza's memories, in the stories they'd carry forever. But scars meant survival. They meant you'd been through something that tried to break you, and you'd come out the other side still standing. The rain intensified, and finally they ran for shelter, Caleb holding a blanket over Eliza and Sarah, all three of them soaked and laughing by the time they reached the wagon. Other families were doing the same, everyone muddy and happy, celebrating the water that meant life, the community that meant hope, the future that stretched out before them like the land itself, vast and challenging and absolutely worth fighting for. As they drove home through the storm, Sarah woke and started crying. Eliza soothed her while Caleb guided the horse through the mud, and in that moment, messy, imperfect, real, Caleb felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what he'd been fighting for, not just survival, but life, not just existence, but purpose, not just making it through, but building something that would last beyond him. The ranch appeared through the rain, lights glowing in the windows. Home. Not the house he'd shared with his first wife. That version had died with her. This was something new, built from grief and determination and the stubborn refusal to let the past destroy the future. They burst through the door dripping wet, and Caleb started a fire while Eliza changed Sarah into dry clothes. The routine was familiar now, comfortable, theirs. When everything was settled, they sat together on the couch Eliza had insisted they buy, Sarah between them, watching the flames dance. "I love you," Caleb said quietly. I know, Eliza replied, smiling.
No, I mean, he struggled for words. I love you for not letting me quit, for showing up when I needed someone most, for being strong enough to build this life with me. Eliza took his hand. I love you for giving me a reason to stay, for seeing something in me worth trusting, for being brave enough to let me in. Sarah made a gurgling sound, looking up at both of them with wide, curious eyes. And we love you, they said together, and Sarah smiled like she understood.
Outside, the rain continued to fall, filling the basin, soaking into the ground, promising another season of growth. Inside, a family that shouldn't have existed, built from loss and chance and the decision to keep trying, sat warm and safe, watching the fire and listening to the rain and believing finally that tomorrow would be better than today. Because they'd earned it. Not through luck or divine intervention, but through the simple, brutal, beautiful act of refusing to give up on each other or themselves. That was the lesson Caleb would pass to his daughter, and she would pass to her children, and so on down the line. That strength isn't what you're born with. It's what you choose when everything in you wants to quit. That community isn't something you find. It's something you build, one relationship at a time, one act of trust after another. That love isn't falling or finding or any other passive verb. It's fighting and choosing and working and refusing to walk away when things get hard. The dam would stand for generations. The trust would manage water for the county long after everyone who'd fought for it was gone. The community would grow and change and adapt, facing new challenges with the same stubborn determination that had birthed it. But the real legacy, the one that mattered most, was sitting in this house on this rainy night, a man who'd learned to live again. A woman who'd discovered her own strength, a child who would grow up knowing that impossible things become possible when people refuse to accept defeat. The fire crackled. The rain drummed on the roof. Sarah fell asleep between them, safe and loved, and completely unaware that her very existence was a miracle her parents had fought desperately to earn. And Caleb and Eliza sat there, holding each other, watching their daughter breathe, grateful for every impossible thing that had led them to this moment, and ready, finally, fully ready, for whatever came next. Because they knew now what they hadn't known before, that you don't survive life by avoiding the storms. You survive by learning to build dams that hold when the water comes, by finding people who'll stand with you when the pressure builds, by refusing to let fear or loss or defeat write the final chapter of your story. You survive by building, by fighting, by loving, by choosing every single day to keep going. And that was enough.
It means to like put the loop in between the stitches on the left side or the right side of the needle, I've learned, which is actually pretty easy to do, I must say. I've had this is such an easy project. Like if people want beginner friendly knitting project, I highly recommend this pattern. Highly. Tash, what have you been up to lately? Any crafts? I know you were preparing stuff for a market or during market season. I was wondering how that's been going. I don't know if anyone else has like major allergies with their eyes. But my God, my eyes are just like on fire lately. Do you know what? I need to reach out to urgent care. I think I'm going to do that after stream, post stream. I'm going to do a virtual urgent care visit because I need to get some eye drops and I need to get my EpiPen renewed because I'm in between allergy doctors at the moment. Today was horns for hats. Did I read that right? It was a horny day. Oh my God. Love your face. Don't change. Tash. Hello, Seabass. How you doing? I'm always market prepping. It is eternal. That sounds like a mood for life.